The 42nd floor of the Rothschild Capitol Tower glowed like a beacon against Manhattan's midnight skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a kingdom of mahogany and marble where billions were won and lost before breakfast. Harrison Rothschild III stood at his desk, a monument of polished rosewood that had belonged to his grandfather, surrounded by contracts that would reshape the financial world by morning. The merger document sprawled across a leather surface like a promise of even greater power, each page representing another zero in his already staggering net worth, another victory in a life that had known nothing but triumph. His reflection in the dark window showed a man who'd been born on third base and believed he'd hit a triple. 6 feet of tailored Armani, steel gray eyes, and the kind of jawline that made him a fixture in Page 6 society columns. Harrison Rothschild III didn't just command Wall Street. He embodied it, breathed it, owned it with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in his entire privileged life. 60 floors below, in the building's basement service area where fluorescent lights flickered and the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with mop water, Maria Santos changed into her cleaning uniform with practiced efficiency that came from 2 years of night shifts. Her fingers, which had once typed million-dollar trading recommendations at Goldman Sachs, now fastened the buttons on a gray polyester shirt embroidered with Elite Building Services. The irony of the name never lost on her as she clipped her ID badge to her collar. She tied her dark hair back in a practical ponytail, hiding the highlights she could no longer afford to maintain, and grabbed her supply cart with the same determination she'd once brought to Harvard Business School case studies. The basement break room was a world away from the glass towers above, filled with night workers who cleaned the messes of the powerful, invisible people who kept the machinery of Manhattan running while the city slept. Maria checked her phone, a text from her sister Sophia confirming she'd gotten home safely from her medical school study group, and felt a familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a second uniform. The elevator ride to the executive floors was a journey through parallel universes, each ding of the ascending car marking another tax bracket, another layer of Manhattan's rigid social hierarchy that Maria had once belonged to before everything fell apart. She remembered taking these same elevators in her former life, carrying a Birkin bag instead of cleaning supplies, wearing Louboutins instead of non-slip shoes, discussing derivatives and hedge fund strategies instead of which bathroom needed more paper towels. The fluorescent reflection in the elevator's brass doors showed a woman who looked nothing like the rising star she'd been at 28, before she'd made the mistake of having a conscience on Wall Street, before she'd blown the whistle on insider trading, and discovered that integrity didn't pay the bills. Now at 31, she was invisible again, which was exactly what she needed to be while supporting Sophia through medical school at Columbia. Just 3 more years of night shifts, of swallowing pride, of being nobody so her sister could become somebody. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, with a soft chime that sounded like a warning bell for everything about to change. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Harrison barely glanced up when the cleaning lady entered his office, too focused on the merger documents that Richard Chun, his business partner of 15 years, had flagged as urgent signatures before tomorrow's board meeting. His ex-wife Vanessa sat perched on the edge of his desk, her Cartier bracelet catching the light as she pointed at specific pages with manicured nails, her presence in his office at midnight justified by her role as the firm's head of investor relations. Richard stood by the bar cart, pouring 3 glasses of Macallan 25, celebrating what they called the deal of the decade, an $800 million merger with Sterling Global that would make Rothschild Capital the dominant player in leveraged buyouts across Asia-Pacific markets. The contracts represented months of negotiation, countless midnight conference calls with Hong Kong and Singapore, and the culmination of Harrison's vision to expand beyond the New York market that his grandfather had dominated in the 1960s. None of them noticed when Maria's cartwheels squeaked slightly on the marble floor, announcing her arrival with all the significance of background music in an elevator. "Mr. Rothschild," Maria said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of urgency that Harrison completely missed as he initialed another page. She'd learned to make herself small in these spaces, to speak softly so as not to startle the masters of the universe who expected invisibility from help. But something about these contracts had made her pause during her cleaning rounds. The documents had been left partially visible on his desk, and her trained eye, the one that had earned her top marks in Professor Jensen's mergers and acquisitions class at Harvard, had caught something wrong in the fine print, a clause that didn't belong, a trap hidden in legal language. She stepped closer, her heart pounding with the memory of another time she'd spoken up and lost everything. But Sophia's tuition bill was nothing compared to what this man stood to lose. "Sir, I don't mean to interrupt, but those papers on your desk—" "Just empty the trash," Harrison said without looking up, his tone carrying the casual dismissal of someone who'd never had to consider the cleaning staff as actual human beings with thoughts or opinions worth hearing. He signed another page with his Mont Blanc pen, a gift from his grandfather that had signed billion-dollar deals, while Vanessa laughed softly at something Richard said about celebrating at Cipriani downtown after the board meeting. The office smelled of expensive scotch and even more expensive cologne, the scent of power and money, so thick you could taste it, so different from the chemical cleaners on Maria's cart. Harrison Rothschild III existed in a bubble, where people like Maria Santos couldn't matter, were simply furniture with heartbeats who existed to serve and disappear. His world was board meetings and charity galas, polo matches in the Hamptons, and skiing in Gstaad, a universe where a cleaning lady's opinion on merger documents was as relevant as a homeless person's stock tips. Maria felt her face flush with embarrassment and something deeper, a familiar anger at being dismissed, at being invisible despite having the same Harvard MBA that probably hung on Harrison's mahogany panel wall. She opened her mouth to try again, to warn him about the shell company clause buried in Section 14 that would transfer majority control to a Cayman Islands entity she'd recognized from her Goldman Sachs days. But Vanessa's voice cut to the moment like a knife. "Harrison, darling, the cleaning can wait until we're finished. We're in the middle of important business here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, treating Maria like an interruption rather than a person. Richard laughed and made a joke about getting financial advice from the help. Something about asking the janitor's opinion on the Hong Kong markets, and they all chuckled as if Maria wasn't standing 3 feet away. The humiliation burned like acid in her throat, but she'd learned to swallow it, to smile politely and retreat, to remember that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when Sophia's medical school tuition was due in 2 weeks. "Of course, my apologies," Maria said, her voice professionally neutral even as her hands gripped the handle of her cleaning cart hard enough to make her knuckles white. She moved to the trash can in the corner, emptying it with mechanical efficiency while her mind raced through calculations. If she reported the suspicious clause to the SEC, she'd be blacklisted again, but if she said nothing, this arrogant billionaire would lose everything. Harrison's office was a shrine to inherited wealth and Ivy League privilege. Yale diploma, Harvard Business School certificate, photos with presidents and foreign dignitaries, deal tombstones from acquisitions that reshaped industries. On his desk sat a family photo from happier times. Harrison with Vanessa and 2 golden retrievers at their Southampton estate. Though Maria knew from office gossip that the marriage had ended badly 2 years ago with a prenup that left Vanessa furious. She finished emptying the trash and glanced one more time at the contracts, at the signatures Harrison was adding with such confident ignorance, and made a decision that would change both their lives. She pulled out a notepad from her cart, the same leather Moleskine she'd used at Harvard for case study notes, now used for inventory lists, and wrote quickly in neat handwriting honed by years of taking notes in lecture halls and boardrooms. The note explained the shell company trap in Section 14, the Cayman Islands entity, the transfer control clause that would activate 72 hours after signing, written in the technical language of someone who understood corporate law and structured finance. She signed it simply M. Santos, HBS 18, and placed on the credenza near the private elevator Harrison used every morning, where he'd find alone, away from Vanessa and Richard's eyes. It was the same kind of whistleblowing that had destroyed her career at Goldman Sachs, the same inconvenient truth-telling that had made her untouchable on Wall Street, but she couldn't watch another financial crime unfold in front of her. Maria pushed her cart toward the door, her heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or the most important decision. Only time would tell which. Harrison barely noticed when she left, too busy celebrating with Richard and Vanessa, toasting to their brilliant deal with crystal glasses that cost more than Maria made in a month. He signed the last page with a flourish, confident in his genius. Secure in his power, completely unaware that the cleaning lady he dismissed without a glance had just tried to save him from professional annihilation. The Manhattan skyline glittered outside his windows like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its glass towers. Vanessa leaned over to kiss Harrison's cheek, her perfume expensive and cloying, while Richard collected the signed contracts with barely concealed satisfaction in his eyes. The three of them looked like they'd won the lottery, like they owned the world, like nothing could touch them, power and privilege and arrogance wrapped in designer suits and inherited wealth. None of them could have imagined that their perfect plan was already beginning to unravel because of a woman they considered beneath their notice. The elevator ride down to the basement felt longer than usual, Maria's hands shaking slightly as she gripped the cart, adrenaline and fear, and something like hope mixing in her bloodstream like a dangerous cocktail. She'd done what she could, left a warning, spoken truth to power even though power never wanted to listen. The rest was up to Harrison Rothschild III and whatever wisdom or foolishness he possessed. The basement break room was empty at 1 a.m., just flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of industrial washing machines cleaning the building's linens, a strange comfort in the mechanical routine after the tension upstairs. Maria changed back into her street clothes, jeans and a Columbia hoodie that had been Sophia's before the medical school logo made her too sentimental to wear it, and walked out into the Manhattanite, where the streets were still alive with taxis and tourists and people chasing dreams. She checked her phone and saw a text from Sophia. "Maya home safe, studying for anatomy exam, love you sis," and felt the weight of responsibility settle back on her shoulders where it belonged. Harrison found the note the next morning at 6 a.m. when he took his private elevator to the 42nd floor. The leather Moleskine page folded neatly on the credenza, where his assistant usually left his espresso and the Wall Street Journal. His head pounded from last night's celebration scotch, and he was running on 3 hours of sleep. But the board meeting was at 9 a.m., and he needed to review the merger documents one final time before the signing ceremony. He almost tossed a note in the trash, assuming it was some maintenance request or building notice. But something about the handwriting made him pause, neat, confident, educated, not the scrawl of someone asking about cleaning supplies. The note began, "Mr. Rothschild, I apologize for the unusual communication method, but I tried to warn you last night about the merger documents," and Harrison felt his stomach drop as recognition dawned. The cleaning lady, the one he dismissed without a glance. He read on, his hangover forgotten, as Maria Santos laid out in precise financial language exactly what was wrong with the contracts he'd signed so confidently just hours ago. The shell company in Section 14 was incorporated in the Cayman Islands under the name Sterling Holdings Ltd., which sounded legitimate until you understood that it wasn't part of Sterling Global at all. It was a separate entity that would acquire 51% controlling interest in Rothschild Capital 72 hours after contract execution. The transfer clause was buried in subsection 14.3b, written in dense legal language that looked like standard boilerplate about international subsidiary coordination, but was actually a corporate takeover mechanism. Maria's note explained it with the clarity of a Harvard Business School case study, complete with references to similar schemes she'd seen in her Goldman Sachs days, the kind of fraud that made headlines when it was discovered too late. She'd signed the note M. Santos, HBS 18, which Harrison initially assumed was a mistake. The cleaning lady couldn't have an MBA from Harvard, but the technical sophistication of the analysis made him reconsider everything he thought he knew. His hands started to shake as he realized he'd been seconds away from signing over his grandfather's legacy to thieves, saved only by a woman he'd treated like furniture. He pulled up the merger documents on his computer and went directly to Section 14, reading it 3 times while his coffee grew cold, and felt sick as he understood how close he'd come to destruction. The clause was brilliant in its deception. Most lawyers would skim past it. Most executives would never catch it. Hidden in plain sight among hundreds of pages of legitimate legal framework. Harrison grabbed his phone and called his personal attorney, then his head of legal at the firm, demanding they come to his office immediately for an emergency review of the Sterling Global merger. By 7 a.m., his conference room was filled with lawyers who confirmed what Maria Santos had written in her neat handwriting. The contracts were a trap, a brilliant piece of corporate theft that would have stolen everything his family had built since 1962. The lawyers wanted to know how he discovered it, who tipped him off, and Harrison had to admit that it was the night cleaning lady, which was met with skeptical silence. Nobody said what they were all thinking, that a cleaning lady couldn't possibly have the expertise to spot this. But Harrison remembered that signature, HBS 18. Find out everything you can about Maria Santos, Harrison told his head of security, a former NYPD detective who ran background checks on everyone who worked in the building. Within 30 minutes, he had a file that read like a tragedy: Maria Elena Santos, Harvard Business School class of 2018. Top 10% of her class, recruited by Goldman Sachs straight out of business school into their mergers and acquisitions group. She'd been a rising star until she blew the whistle on a managing director who was using insider information to front-run client trades, a move that should have made her a hero, but instead made her a pariah. Wall Street had its own code of silence, and whistleblowers learned quickly that integrity didn't pay the rent. Maria had been quietly forced out, blacklisted from every major firm through informal networks of power that protected their own. She'd spent 2 years working night shifts as a cleaning lady, supporting her younger sister through Columbia Medical School, invisible in the same buildings where she once commanded respect. Harrison sat at his desk with Maria's file open on his computer screen, her Goldman Sachs ID photo showing a woman who looked nothing like the tired cleaning lady from last night. Confident smile, expensive highlights, the glow of someone who believed the system would reward doing the right thing. The file included her performance reviews from business school, glowing recommendations from professors, a thesis on detecting fraud in complex corporate structures that had won the Dean's Award for Excellence. She'd given up everything to support her sister, sacrificed her career and future for family, working minimum wage jobs to pay for someone else's dream of becoming a doctor. Harrison thought about his own privileges, the trust fund that had made him wealthy before he earned his first dollar, the family connections that opened every door, the safety net of inherited money that meant he'd never known real consequence for his mistakes. Maria Santos had more courage in her little finger than he'd shown in his entire protected life, and he dismissed her like she was nothing. The board meeting at 9 a.m. was explosive when Harrison announced he wouldn't be signing the merger documents, that legal had discovered fraud in the contracts, that Sterling Global was attempting corporate theft through shell company mechanisms. Richard Chun looked shocked, then angry, demanding to know who had found the supposed fraud, insisting they were throwing away the deal of the decade over paranoid legal parsing. Vanessa sat very still, her face carefully neutral, asking careful questions about exactly which clause was problematic and who had first noticed the issue. Harrison watched them both carefully and remembered something Maria's note had mentioned, that the shell company structure looked familiar from a case she tracked at Goldman Sachs involving overseas partners and complicit insiders. His grandfather had always told him that the worst betrayals came from people closest to you, the ones you trusted with your secrets and your back. The room felt suddenly cold despite the morning sun streaming through the 42nd floor windows. "I want a forensic audit of how these contracts were negotiated," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd finally woken up to reality. "I want to know everyone who touched them, everyone who reviewed them, everyone who recommended this merger from the beginning." Richard stood up abruptly, saying something about having another meeting, about trusting partners, about paranoia destroying good business. But Harrison watched his business partner of 15 years flee the conference room with new eyes. Vanessa stayed, playing concerned ex-wife perfectly, asking what she could do to help. But her Cartier bracelet caught the light, and Harrison remembered that she'd been pushing this merger harder than anyone, that she'd been there last night, insisting he sign immediately. The lawyers began their investigation, while Harrison sat at the head of the table, thinking about a cleaning lady who'd risked her invisibility to save a man who treated her like trash. He knew what he had to do, what integrity demanded, what his grandfather would have expected. But first he had to find Maria Santos and apologize for being exactly the kind of arrogant billionaire he'd always claimed he wasn't. Maria showed up for her shift that evening at 11 p.m., expecting nothing different from the thousands of other nights she'd spent cleaning offices and emptying trash cans for people who never learned her name. The basement break room buzzed with gossip about some emergency meeting on the executive floors, something about a merger falling apart and lawyers everywhere. But Maria ignored it as she changed into her uniform. She'd said her piece with that note, done what her conscience demanded, and now she needed to focus on what mattered. the paycheck that would arrive Friday and help cover Sophia's textbook costs for next semester. Her cart was loaded with supplies when her supervisor approached with a strange expression, half nervous and half awed, saying that Mr. Rothschild himself had requested Maria Santos specifically for the executive floor tonight. The other cleaning staff stared as Maria headed to the elevator, wondering what she'd done wrong, preparing herself for being fired for overstepping boundaries last night. The elevator ride to 42 felt like ascending to an execution, each floor ding a countdown to unemployment, and Maria mentally calculated how long her savings would last while she found another night shift position. The doors opened to reveal Harrison Rothschild III standing in the hallway, not in his usual tailored suit, but in shirt sleeves and loosened tie, looking tired and human, and nothing like the arrogant master of the universe from last night. He dismissed the security guard with a wave, leaving them alone on the executive floor where the city lights sparkled beyond the windows like a field of stars. "Ms. Santos," he said, and his voice was different now. Respectful, careful, the tone of someone who'd realized he'd badly misjudged another human being. Maria gripped her cart handle and waited for whatever was coming, her heart pounding, wondering if integrity was about to cost her another job she couldn't afford to lose. "I owe you an apology," Harrison said, the words clearly difficult for someone who'd probably never had to say them before. "Last night I was arrogant and dismissive, and you tried to save me from making the biggest mistake of my career." He held up the leather moleskine page with her note, now protected in a plastic sleeve like evidence, which it probably was given the lawyers Maria had heard were swarming the building. His steel gray eyes met hers directly for first time, actually seeing her as a person rather than furniture, and Maria felt the strange disorientation of suddenly being visible after 2 years of invisibility. "Your analysis was brilliant. My lawyers confirmed everything you wrote, the shell company trap, the transfer clause, all of it." Harrison stepped closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the industrial cleaner smell from her cart in a combination that somehow captured the absurdity of this moment. "You have an MBA from Harvard Business School, and you're working as a night cleaner in my building. I need to know why." Maria considered lying, considered brushing it off, considered maintaining the invisibility that had kept her safe. But something in Harrison's expression told her he'd already investigated, already knew her story, was asking for confirmation rather than information. "I blew the whistle on insider trading at Goldman Sachs 3 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack through. "Turns out Wall Street doesn't like whistleblowers, even when you're right, especially when you're right, because it makes powerful people look bad." She thought about her former managing director, the one who'd used client information to make millions in illegal trades, the one who'd walked away with a golden parachute while Maria got blacklisted. "I tried to get other positions in finance, but the word was out. Integrity makes you unemployable when everyone else is playing dirty." Her hands tightened on the cart handle, knuckles white. "My little sister Sophia got into Columbia Medical School, which was her dream since she was 8 years old. So I took this job to pay her tuition because someone had to, and I wasn't going to let her sacrifice her future because I did the right thing." Harrison's expression shifted through several emotions: respect, shame, anger at the injustice, recognition of his own privilege, before settling on something that looked like determination. "The shell company leads back to my business partner Richard Chun and my ex-wife Vanessa," he said, pulling out his phone and showing Maria photographs of corporate documents, offshore accounts, email chains between Richard and Sterling global executives. The evidence was damning: a conspiracy to steal Rothschild capital that had been months in the planning, with Vanessa providing insider information about Harrison's schedule and decision-making process. Richard and Vanessa had been having an affair for over a year, using pillow talk to coordinate the perfect corporate coup that would leave Harrison penniless and bewildered. "My forensic accountants found the trail this afternoon. They were going to steal everything my grandfather built and split between them, and I almost let them do it because I was too arrogant to listen to the cleaning lady." He looked at Maria with an expression that might have been admiration. "You saved my company, Ms. Santos, and possibly my life given how badly they wanted me out of the way." "I couldn't just watch it happen," Maria said, thinking about all the times she'd been told to look the other way, to mind her business, to remember her place in the hierarchy. "I saw too much fraud at Goldman Sachs. Saw too many good people lose everything while criminals got rich, and I promised myself I'd never be complicit in that again. She thought about her father, who'd worked construction his whole life and died believing in the American dream, believing that hard work and integrity mattered, never knowing how often the game was rigged from the start. So yeah, I left you a note and hoped you'd actually read it instead of throwing it away like most rich guys would have. She met his eyes directly, cleaning lady to billionaire, and found herself curious about what happened now. Did he thank her and send her back to emptying trash cans, or was this conversation going somewhere else? Harrison laughed, a sound of genuine surprise and something like relief, as if he'd been holding his breath waiting to see if Maria was real or just another player with an angle. Most rich guys would have thrown away, he agreed, which is part of why I was almost destroyed by people I trusted while ignoring someone I should have listened to. He gestured toward his office, an invitation rather than a command. Can we talk in private? I have a proposition for you, Ms. Santos, and it involves significantly less cleaning and significantly more corporate strategy. Maria felt her heart rate spike. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or another trap disguised as generosity, and she'd learned the hard way that nothing came free. But Sophia's tuition was due in 2 weeks, and her own dreams of using her Harvard MBA for something other than identifying which offices needed restocking hadn't completely died despite 2 years of night shifts. She pushed her cart aside, followed Harrison Rothschild III into his mahogany-paneled office, and prepared herself for whatever came next. The view from his office was breathtaking even at midnight. Manhattan spread out like a circuit board of lights and life and possibility. The city that never slept lived up to its reputation beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Harrison poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, offering one to Maria with a courtesy that felt almost foreign after so long being treated as invisible, and gestured to one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. I need help cleaning house, literally and metaphorically, he said with dark humor. Richard and Vanessa have been systematically positioning themselves to take over my company, which means I can't trust my existing management team. I don't know who else they've compromised. He pulled out a folder containing organizational charts, financial statements, lists of executives, and their relationships. I need someone smart enough to understand complex financial structures, honest enough to tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and invisible enough that they won't see her coming until it's too late. His eyes met Maria's with an intensity that made her breath catch. I need you, Ms. Santos, and I'm prepared to offer you a position as my chief strategy officer with a compensation package that reflects your actual value rather than your current job title. The number Harrison wrote on a notepad made Maria's vision blur. $350, 000 base salary plus performance bonuses that could double that, with a $2 million signing bonus paid immediately to cover what we call back wages for lost career years. It was more money than her father had made in his entire lifetime of construction work, more money than she dreamed of even at Goldman Sachs. Enough money to pay for Sophia's entire medical school and still have enough left over for Maria to buy an apartment and start rebuilding her life. She stared at the number, her hands shaking slightly, wondering if this was real or if she'd fallen asleep in the basement break room and was dreaming the impossible. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because generosity from billionaires always came with strings attached, always had hidden costs that didn't show up until you were already trapped. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I left you a note. That's all. That doesn't warrant this kind of offer. You saved my company, Harrison said simply, as if that explained everything, as if corporate loyalty and integrity were commodities that could be purchased rather than qualities that had to be proven. But more than that, you did the right thing when it cost you everything. At Goldman Sachs, here with me, probably a dozen other times in your life when staying quiet would have been easier. He pulled out Maria's Goldman Sachs file, the one his security team had compiled, showing her own performance reviews and the whistleblower complaint that had ended her career. Wall Street blacklisted you for having a conscience, which tells me everything I need to know about Wall Street and everything I need to know about you. Harrison leaned forward, his expression intense. I'm not offering you charity, Ms. Santos. I'm offering you a job that matches your credentials and compensates for the injustice of the last 3 years. His voice softened. And maybe, if I'm being completely honest, I'm trying to be less an arrogant ass who dismisses people based on their uniform rather than their actual capabilities. Maria felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry in front of Harrison Rothschild III, even if they were tears of relief and gratitude, and hope that maybe the universe occasionally cared about justice. She thought about Sophia, about telling her baby sister that medical school was fully paid for, that she could focus on studying instead of worrying about money, that their father's belief in the American dream hadn't been completely naive. "I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice at the cleaning company," she said, her practical side asserting itself even as her heart was singing. "I won't leave them short-staffed just because I got a better offer. They gave me a job when no one else would." Harrison laughed again, that same sound of surprised delight, as if Maria kept exceeding his expectations in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about people. "That's exactly why I need you," he said. "Start Monday. Give your notice tomorrow. I'll pay you for the 2 weeks of cleaning shifts plus your new salary starting immediately." He extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Welcome to Rothschild Capital, Chief Strategy Officer Santos." The handshake felt like crossing a border into a new country, firm and professional, and full of promise that Maria desperately wanted to believe in. "I need you to understand something," she said, not releasing his hand. "I'm not going to be a yes person. I'm not going to look the other way when I see problems. And I'm not going to pretend things are fine when they're not." She thought about all the times that honesty had cost her, all the ways that integrity had become a liability in her career. "If that's going to be an issue, tell me now before I quit my night shift and get invested in this opportunity." Harrison's grip tightened slightly, his eyes showing something that might have been respect or might have been the beginning of something deeper. "Ms. Santos, the last thing I need is another person telling me what I want to hear. I need someone who'll tell me what I need to know." He released her hand and stepped back. "But fair warning, Richard and Vanessa are going to fight back hard when they realize I know about their scheme, and having you in a C-suite position is going to make you a target." "I've been a target before," Maria said, thinking about the Goldman Sachs managing director who'd threatened her career, her reputation, her future for daring to report his crimes. "I survived being blacklisted from Wall Street. I survived 2 years of night shifts and invisibility. I can survive whatever your ex-wife and business partner throw at me." She felt something stirring in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but excitement, the thrill of a challenge, the anticipation of using her brain for something other than calculating which offices needed more toilet paper. "When do we take them down?" The question came out harder than she'd intended, carrying all the accumulated rage of 3 years being punished for doing right. Harrison's smile turned sharp, predatory, the expression of someone who just realized he had an unexpected weapon in a fight he thought he was losing. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., he said. "I'm going to present the forensic audit findings and call for immediate termination and criminal prosecution." His eyes glittered with something that might have been vengeance or justice, the line between them always blurry when personal betrayal met corporate fraud. "I'd like you there as my chief strategy officer, showing the board exactly who discovered the fraud and why we need people of integrity in leadership positions." The thought of walking into a boardroom full of Wall Street titans as an equal rather than invisible staff made Maria's stomach twist with nervousness and anticipation in equal measure. She'd spent 2 years making herself small, perfecting invisibility as a survival skill, and now Harrison was asking her to be spectacularly visible at the moment of maximum drama. "I'll need to go home and find my business suit," she said, thinking about the Armani pieces still hanging in her closet from her Goldman Sachs days, preserved like artifacts from a previous life. "And I should warn you that my showing up as an executive is going to raise questions. People are going to want to know how the cleaning lady became chief strategy officer overnight." Harrison shrugged, unconcerned, already thinking 3 moves ahead. "Let them ask," he said. "The story of how you saved this company is exactly the kind of narrative that plays well in media and with shareholders. Harvard MBA working night shift spots fraud that all our lawyers miss, gets promoted to C-suite based on merit." He paused. "Besides, watching Richard and Vanessa's faces when you walk can be worth any awkward questions." Maria left Rothschild Capital at 2 a.m. that night, not through the basement service and trance she'd used for 2 years, but through the main lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, carrying a leather portfolio containing her employment contract, and walking like someone who belonged in these spaces. The security guard who usually ignored her looked twice, confused by the cleaning lady in the Rothschild Capital portfolio, and Maria smiled at him with genuine warmth because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. The Manhattan streets were quieter now, the after-midnight calm before the city's second wind around 4 a.m., and Maria walked the 12 blocks to her tiny studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen feeling like she was floating. She pulled out her phone and called Sophia despite the late hour, because some news couldn't wait for morning. "Hey, sis," she said when her sister answered, voice groggy with sleep. "Remember how I told you not to worry about tuition, because I'd figure out?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face in the Manhattan darkness. "Well, I figured it out." The emergency board meeting the next morning felt like walking into a gladiator arena. 15 board members arranged around the mahogany table with Richard Chun and Vanessa Rothschild seated in positions of power they'd been carefully cultivating for months. Maria entered behind Harrison wearing her best Armani suit from her Goldman days, her hair professionally styled for the first time in 2 years, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned her Harvard MBA through brilliance rather than inheritance. The room fell silent as Harrison introduced her as the new chief strategy officer, and Maria watched the color drain from Richard's face as he recognized her from somewhere, his mind clearly racing to place how he knew the woman who'd been invisible furniture just days ago. Vanessa's expression stayed carefully neutral, but her hands tightened on her Mont Blanc pen hard enough to make her knuckles white, and Maria knew that Harrison's ex-wife understood exactly who she was and what her presence meant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 generations of Rothschild leadership, "I've called an emergency meeting because our forensic audit has uncovered systematic fraud in the Sterling Global merger agreement." He nodded to Maria, who stepped forward with presentation remote and pulled up the first slide showing the shell company's structure, the Cayman Islands entity, the transfer control clause that would have stolen everything. Her voice was steady as she walked the board to the fraud with the precision of a Harvard case study, explaining how the merger would transfer 51% ownership to an entity controlled by Richard Chun and Sterling Global executives within 72 hours of signing. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, board members flipping to the contracts Maria had marked up, lawyers confirming the analysis with grim expressions. Richard stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, accusing Maria of fabricating evidence and asking what qualified a cleaning lady to make strategic recommendations to the board. "Actually," Maria said calmly, enjoying this moment more than she probably should have, "I have an MBA from Harvard Business School, graduated top 10% of my class in 2018, and spent 3 years at Goldman Sachs in mergers and acquisitions before I blew the whistle on insider trading." She pulled up her credentials on the screen, diplomas, performance reviews, the Dean's Award thesis on detecting corporate fraud that suddenly looked very relevant to the current situation. "I recognize the shell company's structure from a case I investigated at Goldman, which is why I warned Mr. Rothschild not to sign these contracts." The board members stared at her with new respect, seeing her for the first time, understanding that she wasn't some random person Harrison had elevated on a whim. "The forensic audit Mr. Rothschild commissioned confirms everything I identified, including evidence that the fraud conspiracy includes internal participants." Maria looked directly at Richard, then Vanessa, her expression neutral but her meaning crystal clear. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question of how such obvious fraud made it past our due diligence process, and who benefited from this oversight. Harrison stepped forward and pulled up the next slides, email chains between Richard and Sterling Global, evidence of offshore accounts, records of meetings where conspiracy was planned, phone records showing hundreds of calls between Richard and Vanessa after their divorce when they supposedly hated each other. The evidence was methodically presented, irrefutable, damning in its completeness, showing a conspiracy to steal Rothschild capital that had been 18 months in the planning. "My business partner and my ex-wife have been systematically positioning themselves to execute a corporate coup," Harrison said, his voice harder than Maria had ever heard it. "They used their positions of trust to facilitate what amounts to corporate theft on a massive scale, and only Ms. Santos' intervention prevented them from succeeding." Richard was shouting now, calling a setup, demanding his own lawyer, threatening lawsuits, but the board members were looking at the evidence with a cold assessment of people who'd seen too many corporate crimes to dismiss this one. Vanessa stayed silent, her lawyer's training keeping her quiet, but her face was pale and her hands were shaking despite her attempt at composure. The board voted unanimously to terminate Richard Chun immediately, escorted from the building by security, with his access codes revoked and his computer seized as evidence. Vanessa's position as head of investor relations was suspended pending investigation, her protest falling on deaf ears as the board realized how deeply she'd been involved in conspiracy. Maria watched him go with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was being served, sadness that it had come to this betrayal of trust and friendship. The boardroom felt lighter once they were gone, as if the removal of toxicity had literally changed the air quality, and the remaining members turned to Maria with questions about her background, her vision for the company, her plans as chief strategy officer. She answered each query with confidence, discussing market strategy and risk assessment and cultural transformation with the fluency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment through 2 years of night shifts and damaged pride. This was her redemption, her validation, her proof that integrity could survive in a world that seemed designed to crush it. Harrison caught her eye across the boardroom table and smiled, a private moment of shared victory. And Maria felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with professional success. She'd been so focused on surviving, on supporting Sophia, on maintaining her dignity through the humiliation of cleaning toilets she used to use as an executive, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as an equal, to be respected for her mind, to be valued for her contributions. Harrison Rothschild III had arrogance and privilege written into his DNA, had been born on third base and thought he'd hit a triple, but he'd also listened to a cleaning lady's warning when his entire world told him not to, had investigated instead of dismissing, had offered redemption when he could have taken credit himself. Maybe there was more to him than tailored suits and inherited wealth. Maybe underneath the billionaire polish was someone capable of growth, someone worth knowing, someone whose steel-gray eyes made her heart beat faster than professional appreciation warranted. The board meeting ended with authorization for criminal referrals to the SEC and the Manhattan DA's office, freezing of Richard's assets pending investigation, and unanimous support for Harrison's leadership through the crisis. Maria gathered her presentation materials while board members introduced themselves properly, shaking her hand with genuine respect, asking her to lunch to discuss strategy, treating her like the executive she'd always been underneath the uniform. One board member, an elderly woman who'd been friends with Harrison's grandfather, pulled Maria aside and said quietly, "You did something brave warning Harrison about those contracts. Most people have stayed quiet to protect themselves." She squeezed Maria's hand with surprising strength. "This company needs more people like you, people with backbone and integrity, people who do right thing even when it costs them." Maria felt tears threaten again and blinked them back, accepting the compliment with a grateful nod, feeling like maybe her father's belief in the American dream hadn't been wrong after all, just delayed. She left the boardroom to find her new office already set up. Corner space with views of Central Park, mahogany desk with her name on a brass plate, computer and phone waiting for her passwords, assistant assigned and ready to schedule her first meetings. It felt surreal, like walking into a dream or a parallel universe where Maria Santos mattered, where her Harvard degree meant something, where her intelligence was asset rather than liability. She stood at the window looking out at Manhattan spread below her like conquered territory and thought about calling her father's grave to tell him she'd made it, that his sacrifices hadn't been wasted, that his daughter was somebody after all. Instead, she called Sophia, who screamed with joy so loud that Maria had to hold the phone away from her ear and listen to her sister's excited questions about salary in office and whether this meant they could finally order Thai food instead of cooking pasta for the 10th night in a row. "We can order whatever you want," Maria said, laughing through her tears. "We can order Thai food every night for a year if that makes you happy, because your big sister just got a $2 million signing bonus." Richard Chun and Vanessa Rothschild weren't content to disappear quietly into disgrace, instead launching a counteroffensive that Tuesday morning through carefully coordinated media leaks and social media posts. The narrative they spun was masterful in its manipulation. Harrison had manufactured evidence to destroy his business partner and ex-wife because of jealousy over their relationship, using a random cleaning lady he promoted to chief strategy officer as proof of his unstable judgment. Photos appeared on page 6 showing Maria in her cleaning uniform juxtaposed with her new executive position, accompanied by commentary questioning how a janitor became C-suite overnight and suggesting inappropriate relationships between her and Harrison. Financial websites picked up the story with headlines about Rothschild capital crisis. Billionaire promotes cleaning lady while firing executives, treating it as evidence of corporate chaos rather than fraud discovery. Maria's phone exploded with interview requests, social media mentions, and messages from former Goldman Sachs colleagues who suddenly remember her name now that she was news, and the attention felt like being stripped naked in Times Square. Vanessa gave a tearful interview to Bloomberg, saying she tried to warn the board about Harrison's erratic behavior, that Maria Santos was an opportunist who'd manipulated her vulnerable ex-husband during a mental health crisis, that the fraud allegations were fabrications designed to cover Harrison's own mismanagement. She produced emails taken out of context, phone records that looked suspicious without explanation, character witnesses who testified to her dedication to Rothschild capital and concern for Harrison's well-being. Richard appeared on CNBC calling the fraud charges corporate conspiracy theories and demanding independent investigation, positioning himself as the victim of a billionaire's paranoid breakdown. Their lawyers filed motions questioning the forensic audit's methodology, demanding access to Maria's background check results, suggesting she'd been planted by competitors to destabilize Rothschild capital. The media loved the story: billionaire drama, corporate intrigue, Cinderella narrative with sinister undertones, and the coverage was relentless, invasive, destroying privacy Maria hadn't even realized she'd valued. Harrison found Maria in her office at 2 a.m. that Wednesday, staring at her computer screen, where social media comments called her a gold digger, a liar, a cleaning lady with delusions, and worse. She'd been crying, mascara smudged, the polished executive facade cracked by the weight of public scrutiny and character assassination. "They're destroying me," she said without looking up. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, and now I'm just a cleaning lady who slept her way into an executive position, according to Twitter." Her voice was raw with exhaustion and hurt. "Maybe I should resign, make this easier for you and the company. Let them win if it means stopping this nightmare." Harrison crossed the office and knelt beside her chair, turning her to face him, his expression fierce. "Absolutely not," he said. "You're not resigning, you're not disappearing, and you're definitely not letting those criminals win by destroying your reputation." His hands were gentle on her shoulders, despite the intensity of his words. "Tomorrow we're holding a press conference, and we're going to tell the truth, all of it, including your Goldman Sachs history, your Harvard credentials, your whistleblower status, everything that makes their lies obvious." The press conference Thursday morning was held in Rothschild Capital's main conference room with views of Manhattan behind them. Cameras from every major financial network present, reporters filling every seat with notebooks and recording devices. Maria wore her best suit, navy Armani, pearls that had been her grandmother's, heels that made her tall enough to meet Harrison's eyes directly, and felt her hand shake as she approached the podium where microphones bristled like weapons. Harrison introduced her formally, using her full credentials, explaining exactly how she discovered the fraud and why she was eminently qualified for chief strategy officer despite the viral photos of her in cleaning uniform. Then he did something that shocked the room into silence. He apologized publicly for dismissing her warning that first night, for treating her like furniture, for being exactly the kind of arrogant billionaire who judged people by their uniforms instead of their capabilities. "Maria Santos saved my company despite having every reason to let me fail," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the room. "And now I'm asking all of you to judge her by her actions, her credentials, and her integrity rather than by lies spread by people facing criminal charges." Maria stepped forward and told her story with clinical precision that belied the emotion threatening to crack through: Goldman Sachs whistleblower, Wall Street blacklist, Harvard MBA working night shifts to support her sister through medical school, recognizing fraud in the Sterling Global merger because she'd seen similar schemes before. She showed her credentials on the screen behind her, showed the forensic audit results, showed the evidence of Richard and Vanessa's conspiracy, including emails and offshore accounts and detailed financial trails. The reporters were silent as she spoke, the usual shouted questions replaced by shocked attention to a narrative that was far more compelling than the scandal they'd expected. "I didn't sleep my way into this position," Maria said, looking directly into the cameras. "I earned it by doing what any person with integrity would do, warning someone about fraud, even though it cost me my career once before and could have cost me my job again. Her voice strengthened. And I'm not resigning because criminals are trying to destroy my reputation. I'm staying to help rebuild this company with the transparency and honesty that Wall Street desperately needs. The room erupted in questions, but Harrison wrapped up the press conference efficiently, directing reporters to the company's legal team for evidence access and declining to answer questions about his relationship with Maria beyond professional respect and gratitude. They escaped to his office afterward, both shaking with adrenaline, and found Sophia waiting with Thai food and champagne to celebrate her sister's public vindication. "You were amazing," Sophia said, hugging Maria hard enough to crack ribs. "You look like a total badass up there, like some corporate superhero, destroying villains with PowerPoint presentations." Harrison laughed and poured champagne while Maria finally relaxed, the tension of the last week draining away as she realized they'd survived the counterattack. That truth had held against lies, that maybe integrity actually could win sometimes. The three of them sat in Harrison's office eating pad thai and spring rolls while Manhattan sparkled beyond the windows, and Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty that she belonged here, that her redemption was real, that this was the beginning of something rather than the end. Friday morning brought vindication from an unexpected source. The SEC announced criminal charges against Richard Chun and Vanessa Rothschild for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, securities violations, and attempted theft of a public company. The Manhattan DA's office added charges of grand larceny and organized fraud, with evidence so overwhelming that Richard's lawyers immediately began plea negotiations. Video emerged of Richard and Vanessa meeting with Sterling Global executives in the Cayman Islands, discussing the shell company structure and how to hide it from Harrison and the board. Concrete proof of conspiracy that destroyed their credibility completely. Several board members from Sterling Global were also charged, and the entire firm was under investigation for systematic corporate fraud across multiple deals. The media narrative flipped overnight. From scandal about inappropriate promotion to story of heroic whistleblower who'd saved the company and exposed Wall Street corruption, with Maria's face on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Cleaning Lady Who Cleaned Up Wall Street." The public humiliation for Richard and Vanessa happened not in a boardroom, but in the lobby of the New York Stock Exchange during what should have been their moment of triumph, the Sterling Global merger signing ceremony they'd planned for that afternoon. SEC agents arrived with arrest warrants, placing them both in handcuffs while cameras rolled and traders watched from the floor below. Vanessa's lawyer training failed her as she was led away in handcuffs, her designer dress and Cartier bracelet making harsh contrast with the federal custody, while Richard shouted about innocence and set up to reporters who no longer believed him. The footage went viral within minutes. Former executives of Rothschild Capital arrested for attempting to steal the company. Thwarted by a Harvard MBA they dismissed as cleaning lady justice served in the most public way possible. Maria watched the news coverage from Harrison's office and felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. They brought this on themselves through greed and betrayal, but she couldn't completely enjoy watching anyone's destruction, even when they deserved it. The weeks after the arrest blurred together in a haze of rebuilding Rothschild Capital, with Maria working 18-hour days to restructure partnerships, rebuild investor confidence, and establish new fraud prevention protocols that would prevent anything like this from happening again. She thrived in the role, her Goldman Sachs experience and Harvard training finally being used at full capacity, and the company stabilized under her strategic vision faster than anyone had predicted. Harrison worked alongside her through those marathon sessions, and Maria found herself noticing things she tried to ignore, the way his tie came undone around midnight when he was deep in financial models, the genuine laugh that appeared when she made dry jokes about corporate bureaucracy, the respect with which he treated everyone from the mailroom staff to the board members. He was still arrogant sometimes, still carried himself with the confidence of inherited wealth. But there was humility now, too, a recognition that he'd been seconds from losing everything and had been saved by someone he dismissed as beneath his notice. One Thursday evening in late March, after everyone else had gone home, Harrison appeared in Maria's office with takeout from her favorite Thai place and 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. "You've been working yourself to death," he said, setting the food on her desk with a smile that made her heart skip. I figured you needed actual food instead of the vending machine coffee and granola bars you've been surviving on. Maria laughed and accepted the wine, surprised by how easy it felt to be with him now, how the power dynamic had shifted from billionaire and cleaning lady to something closer to equals, partners in rebuilding, friends who'd survived a crisis together. They ate pad thai and talked about everything except work, her father's construction career, his grandfather's advice about business and integrity, her sister's excitement about her anatomy class, his regret about the years he'd wasted with Vanessa before realizing she valued his money more than him. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences and laughter, and Maria realized with a start that she was attracted to him not despite who he was, but because of who he'd become. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said eventually, setting down his wine glass with careful deliberation that suggested he'd been rehearsing this moment. "When I first saw you in that cleaning uniform, I didn't see you at all. You were invisible furniture, someone whose opinion couldn't possibly matter to someone like me." His voice carried genuine shame. "That night you tried to warn me about the merger, I dismissed you without even looking up, and that arrogance almost destroyed everything my family built." He met her eyes directly. "But now when I look at you, I see the most brilliant person in this building, someone with more integrity in her little finger than I had in my entire privileged life, someone who saved me despite having every reason to let me fail." Harrison reached across the desk and took her hand. "I see someone I admire, someone I respect, someone I've fallen for completely despite trying very hard not to because you're my chief strategy officer, and I didn't want to be that billionaire who hits on his employee." His laugh was self-deprecating. "But I can't keep pretending this is just professional anymore." Maria's heart was racing, her practical side screaming warnings about power dynamics and workplace relationships and billionaires who collected beautiful things. But her heart was louder, reminding her that Harrison had proven himself when it mattered. "You were an arrogant ass that first night," she said, her voice soft despite the words. "You dismissed me without even looking up, treated me like I was nothing, and I should probably hold that against you forever." She squeezed his hand. "But you also investigated when you could have ignored my note, believed me when everyone said I was crazy, gave me this position when you could just pay me off and send me away, and stood by me when the media was destroying my reputation." Maria stood and walked around the desk, heart pounded with possibility and fear in equal measure. "I told myself not to fall for you because you're my boss and a billionaire and we're from completely different worlds. But somewhere between the press conference and the Thai food tonight, I realized I was already gone." She touched his face gently. "So yes, Harrison Rothschild III, I'm attracted to you too, and we should probably have a serious discussion about maintaining professional boundaries and not becoming the scandal that proves Vanessa right." Her smile turned mischievous. "But maybe we can have that discussion after you kiss me?" The kiss was everything Maria had tried not to fantasize about during late-night strategy sessions. Gentle at first, then deeper as 2 months of tension and attraction finally found release, his hands in her hair and hers on his shoulders pulling him closer. They broke apart breathless, Harrison resting his forehead against hers with a laugh that sounded like relief and joy mixed together. "We're terrible at professional boundaries," he said, kissing her again. "Absolutely the worst. We should be ashamed of ourselves." Maria laughed against his mouth, feeling light and happy and alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible after years of just surviving. "We can establish professional boundaries tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, I just want to be Maria and Harrison, not chief strategy officer and CEO, not whistleblower and billionaire. Just two people who've been through hell together and came out the other side." They stayed in her office until dawn, talking and kissing and planning a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility, rather than just obstacles to overcome. The next morning, Harrison called a staff meeting and announced that he and Maria were pursuing a personal relationship outside of work, that there would be strict protocols to ensure no appearance of favoritism, that Maria's position was based entirely on merit and performance rather than romance. The staff took it surprisingly well, especially after Harrison showed them Maria's performance metrics from her first month, investor confidence up 37%, 3 major new partnership deals, fraud prevention protocols that had already caught 2 attempted scams from other firms. "Ms. Santos earned her position before we started dating," Harrison said firmly, "and she'll continue earning it through excellent work regardless of our relationship status." Maria stood beside him, professional and composed despite the warmth spreading through her chest, and felt grateful for a man who understood that protecting her reputation meant being transparent rather than secretive. The staff applauded. Several executives approached Maria afterward to express genuine happiness to them both, and Sophia texted a string of celebration emojis with, "I told you he was into you," in all caps that made Maria laugh until she cried. Their relationship developed slowly despite the intensity of that first kiss, both of them cautious about mixing personal and professional, both scarred by past betrayals that made trust difficult. Harrison took Maria to charity galas where she met donors and investors as his partner rather than his employee, introducing her proudly and watching with satisfaction as she charmed billionaires with her intelligence and genuine warmth. She introduced him to Sophia properly, watching with amusement as her sister grilled Harrison about his intentions and net worth with the protective fierceness of someone who'd seen Maria hurt too many times. They established rituals. Sunday brunch at her favorite diner in Hell's Kitchen, where Harrison was hilariously out of place among the working-class families. Friday night Thai food in his office after everyone left. Saturday morning runs through Central Park, where they could be just another couple rather than CEO and CSO. The relationship felt real, built on mutual respect and shared trauma and genuine affection rather than the transactional dynamics Maria had always feared from wealthy men. 3 months after the arrests, Harrison took Maria to the Plaza Hotel for dinner, a 5-star experience that would have intimidated her a year ago, but now felt like just another evening with someone she loved. They ate French cuisine that was probably amazing, but that Maria barely tasted. Too focused on Harrison's nervous energy and the way he kept touching his jacket pocket, like checking for something. After dessert, he took her hand and led her to the palm court where a string quartet was playing, and Maria's breath caught as she realized what was happening. "Maria Santos," Harrison said, dropping to one knee in the middle of the elegant room while other diners watched with delight. "You saved my company, challenged my arrogance, showed me what integrity looks like, and somehow fell in love with me despite having every reason not to." He pulled out a ring, Art Deco platinum and diamonds that looked vintage and perfect. "Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" Maria was crying, laughing, nodding yes before he even finished the question, and the room erupted in applause as he slid the ring on her finger and kissed her while cameras flashed and strangers cheered for fairy tale romance they'd witnessed. The wedding 6 months later was held at the Plaza Hotel in the same palm court, where Harrison had proposed, a small ceremony with just family and close friends rather than society's spectacle it could have been. Sophia was maid of honor, crying happy tears through her entire speech about how proud their father would have been to see Maria finally getting everything she deserved. Harrison's grandfather's business partner, now 90 and using a cane, gave a toast about how the best Rothschild men always recognized quality when they saw it, even if it took them a minute. Maria wore a simple ivory dress that Sophia had helped her choose, elegant rather than ostentatious, and felt beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the designer label or the price tag. Harrison couldn't stop smiling, his usual polished facade completely abandoned in favor of genuine joy. And when they exchanged vows, his voice cracked with emotion that he didn't bother to hide. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved," he said, tears streaming down his face. "And I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift." Rothschild Capital thrived under their joint leadership, becoming known not just for financial success, but for ethical practices and whistleblower protections that other firms studied as models. Maria established a mentorship program for young professionals who'd been blacklisted for doing the right thing, offering them positions at Rothschild Capital and proving that integrity could be rewarded rather than punished. Harrison created a foundation in his grandfather's name that provided scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing business degrees, specifically targeting candidates from working-class backgrounds who brought perspective the financial world desperately needed. Together, they rebuilt the company culture from the ground up, proving that you could be profitable without being predatory, successful without being ruthless. That business done with integrity was business done better. The firm's value doubled in 18 months, investor confidence reached all-time highs, and Maria's face appeared on magazine covers as one of the youngest female CFOs in Manhattan, a title she'd officially earned 6 months after their wedding, when the board voted unanimously to promote her. Richardson pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and received an 8-year federal prison sentence. His assets seized to compensate Rothschild Capital and other victims of schemes over the years. Vanessa fought the charges longer, maintaining her innocence through 2 trials before being convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years. Her fall from society graced complete and public. Maria felt no satisfaction watching them sentenced. Just a quiet sense that justice had been served, and that maybe the system occasionally worked the way it was supposed to. She visited Richard once in prison at his request, listening as he apologized for dismissing her that night, for calling her nobody, for underestimating her completely. "You were invisible to me," he said through the visitor's phone, "and that blindness cost me everything." Maria accepted his apology, but didn't forgive him, recognizing that some betrayals were too deep for absolution, that consequences were sometimes permanent. She left the prison feeling lighter, like closing a chapter that had been weighing on her soul, ready to focus on the future rather than the past. Sophia graduated from Columbia Medical School with honors, accepting a residency position at Mount Sinai that had been her first choice since starting medical school. Maria and Harrison sat in the audience at her graduation, both crying as Sophia walked across the stage and received her diploma, the culmination of years of sacrifice and night shifts and believing that education mattered. That night, at the celebration dinner Harrison had arranged at Sophia's favorite restaurant, Maria's sister pulled her aside with tears in her eyes. "None of this would have happened without you," Sophia said, hugging her tightly. "You gave up everything so I could chase my dreams, work night shifts, and dealt with people treating you like garbage, and you never once made me feel guilty about it." She squeezed Maria's hands. "You're the best person I know, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be half as brave and selfless as you are." Maria cried and laughed and told her sister that watching her succeed was worth every moment of those 2 years. That family was the only investment that mattered more than any stock portfolio. On a sunny October morning 18 months after their wedding, Maria and Harrison stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange preparing to ring the opening bell to celebrate Rothschild Capital's successful restructuring and record growth. Maria was 7 months pregnant, her professional dress tailored around her growing belly, and she felt the baby kick as if responding to the excitement and noise of the trading floor. Harrison's hand rested protectively on her back as they posed for photos, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery, which in many ways they had. Not just financial success, but love, partnership, redemption, family, everything that mattered beyond money. The bell rang at 9:30 a.m. sharp, its sound echoing through the exchange, marking not just the start of another trading day, but the celebration of a journey that started with a cleaning lady's warning and ended with a fairy tale that was real. Cameras flashed and traders applauded while Maria and Harrison kissed for the millionth time in front of witnesses who'd come to celebrate the underdog story that Wall Street couldn't stop talking about. They named their daughter Elena Marie after Maria's grandmother, and she was born 2 months later on a snowy December evening with Sophia present as a delivering doctor and Harrison crying so hard he could barely cut the umbilical cord. Elena had Harrison's steel gray eyes and Maria's dark hair, and from the moment she entered the world, she was adored with an intensity that surprised them both. Maria took 6 months of maternity leave that she structured carefully to ensure Rothschild Capital continued thriving, working part-time from home, while Harrison adjusted his schedule to be present for middle-of-the-night feedings and diaper changes. Their penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, a far cry from Maria's Hell's Kitchen studio, but still feeling like home because of the family that filled it with laughter and chaos and love. Harrison proved surprisingly competent at parenting despite his privileged upbringing, changing diapers without complaint and reading bedtime stories in silly voices that made both Maria and Elena laugh until they cried. On their second wedding anniversary, they returned to the Plaza Hotel for dinner, leaving Elena with Sophia for the evening and enjoying the rare luxury of adult conversation without interruption. 2 years ago, I was a cleaning lady who left you a note in your private elevator, Maria said, squeezing Harrison's hand across the table. And now I'm your wife, your CFO, the mother of your child, and according to Forbes, one of the most powerful women in finance. She laughed at the absurdity of it all. If you'd told me this was how my life would turn out, I would have thought you were insane. Harrison brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. 2 years ago, I was an arrogant billionaire who thought his privilege made him smart, he said. You taught me that real wealth is integrity. Real power is doing the right thing when it costs you, and real success is building something that matters. His eyes were full of love and gratitude. You saved me, Maria, in every possible way, and I'll never stop being grateful that you saw something worth saving. They raised their glasses in a toast to unlikely hearts and second chances, to underdog stories that had happy endings, to love that crossed class barriers and prove that fairy tales could be real if you worked hard enough and got lucky enough and found someone willing to see your value even when you were invisible. The American dream they'd achieved wasn't just wealth, though they had plenty, but family, purpose, integrity, partnership, the complete package that most people spent their lives chasing but rarely found. Maria thought about her father, about his belief that hard work and honesty mattered, and felt grateful that she'd inherited his values, even though she questioned them during those 2 years of night shifts. Harrison thought about his grandfather, about the advice to recognize quality regardless of packaging, and felt grateful he'd finally learned the lesson before it was too late. Together they built something that mattered, not just a successful company, but a family, a legacy, a love story that validated real frustrations while offering real solutions rather than just fantasy. And as they watched the sunset over Manhattan from the plaza's windows, Maria Santos Rothschild knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, that every sacrifice had been worth it, that happy endings were real if you were brave enough to fight for them.